If this is as bad as it looks, the Justice Department needs a deep cleaning, and it's not clear whether Merrick Garland is up for that. Joining us now is Katie Benner. She's the New York Times reporter who covers the Justice Department. Katie, my good friend, good to see you. Good to be back with you in real life. But you and I have been talking for several weeks about this particular issue. What's the tension here? Is there just not enough coming out of the Justice Department to assure members of Congress and the media that this is being taken seriously and rooted out?
Yeah, that's certainly the primary tension right now. I mean, of course, there are always going to be questions about what happened during the Trump administration. Those questions are going to be answered eventually, to your point, in these investigations, which take a lot of time. So what members of Congress are wondering, what reporters are wondering, is why can't the Justice Department begin to answer some of those questions now? It also is an indication that there is maybe a lack of political skill at this Justice Department under this administration. Merrick Garland, he was a federal judge. He is not a political animal. He's not a creature of politics. And if he wants to do everything by the book, I do understand that. But time is of the essence in answering some of these questions and keeping the public's faith in the department, along with with his stated intention of being transparent. So the more time goes by, the fewer questions are answered. That's going to make it harder and harder for people to believe that they will get the answers that they feel they deserve.
What do we know about this head of the Justice Department's National Security Division, John Demers? He's a Trump appointee, according to your reporting in the New York Times. A Trump appointee who remained in the department would typically have been briefed on investigations like those involving the secret collection of journalists' phone records. The Justice Department saying nothing to see here. That was a planned departure.
Yeah, John is a really curious figure because as head of the National Security Division, you would have expected to have been more at loggerheads with President Trump. If you think about what his division does, it looks into very sensitive national security matters. Now, keep in mind, the biggest national security matter was taken out of his hands and given to Robert Mueller. That was the Russia investigation. And he managed to fly under the radar for most of his tenure. There was even talk of allowing him to be the acting attorney general until Merrick Garland was confirmed. He is known as a centrist. He's trusted by people even within this Justice Department. John Carlin is somebody who's worked with him. He continued a lot of the work that John Carlin and the current Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco did before him under the Obama administration. He did not change a lot of their policies on things like China. And he did express to John Carlin, as we've reported, that he wanted to leave in April and May. He was asked to stay on. I think that if he'd known that all of this information was going to come out in the late spring and early summer, he would not have stayed for it, because he does need to do things like try to find a job, and he does need to leave the department, and it's coming at possibly the worst time.
Let's talk a little about this Merrick Garland issuing a statement today in which he says, I've directed the matter be referred to the Inspector General and have full confidence that he will conduct a thorough and independent investigation. If at any time the investigation proceeds, action related to the matter in question is warranted, I will not hesitate to move swiftly. For regular people like us, we think that that must be important, the Inspector General. But what we witnessed over the last 4 years is the politicization or the interference in these Inspector Generals. Every department has one. And so now there seems to be concern by congressional people like Jerry Nadler and others that that's not enough. What should we be thinking about when we realize that this has been referred to the Inspector General? Sure.
And the Inspector General for the Justice Department, Michael Horowitz, has managed to act independently, and his reports have come out really in a way. If we look at the reports he's done, looking into the FISA abuses, looking into the Russia investigation, he's come out with reports that I would say have generally satisfied both sides of the aisle. He is known to be a straight shooter, and I do believe that we will get answers from him. As we've seen in his reports, the answers that we get from him often don't live up to all of the anxiety and hand-wringing that you see, whether it's by conservatives or by progressives, as we sort of get into the finish line when we know his reports are ready to come out. And I say that as a word of caution to the public, only because we don't have all of the facts, in part because the Justice Department won't give them to us. So, in Merrick Garland's mind, in an ideal world, we would all sit back and wait for the work to be done and think about other things. As we've seen over the last 4 years, that's not exactly how it happens. Sorry, Merrick Garland. But in an ideal world, that's what we do, because Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General, does have a history of producing reports that seem credible and that seem fair and that do have the facts that people want. But we also know that that can take, 8 to 18 months. And in the meantime, the political firestorm is going to continue. As we know, members of Congress take it very personally when they are attacked, and they feel attacked in this moment. And so this is not going to let up for the Attorney General.